Hello, everyone. Welcome to this industry panel session, which is the last session for the fourth day of Cyber Science 2020. Welcome to all the attendees, and welcome to all everyone who is watching us live on different social media platforms. But most of all, welcome to our speakers for this panel session, James Chappell and Wayne Bursey. So James is the founder and chief innovation officer at Digital Shadows. He has led teams in infosecurity and cybersecurity for more than 20 years, working across the private and public sector, helping organizations to understand the technical aspects of information security. He has spent over 10 years of his career as a security architect and deputy head of information security profession and BAE system Detica. He previously worked in the telecommunications sector in the United States, and I could keep going for probably another 10 minutes with this bio, but I think I'll stop here. I think that's more than enough to say that it's a great pleasure to have you with us, James. Thanks for giving up your time for doing this.
No problem at all. Thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
And then we also have Wayne Bursey is the industrial cybersecurity lead at Siemens Dublin, focusing on operational technology security for customers' industrial control systems and environments. Wayne has worked with Siemens for 20 years, serving industrial customers, distribution partners, and manufacturers to deliver solutions and services in automation, networking, digitalization, and data-driven IoT platform within the Industry 4.0. Welcome, Wayne. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much, and thank you for everyone who's attending this evening.
Yeah, for you, if this conference was in traditional setting, it would then just be for you. Would have just been a short walk uphill, I guess, because if I'm not mistaken, Siemens is based in another DCU campus. Is that right?
That's it. Yeah, we're based in the DC Innovation Campus in Dublin.
Yeah, and so let's. The way I was thinking about structuring this panel discussion is just to have just a few questions for you, just to get the discussion going, and then we will wait for more interesting questions coming from the audience. So why don't we just start trying to discuss we have a special guest, I guess. So the theme of the day is of the conference is Advancing Social Media Innovation and Convergence in the Digital Economy. So we have experienced a very wide adoption of digital technologies so far, and they've changed how business and organizations interact with different stakeholders. Essentially, I think it's fair to say that today we can't really afford to be offline when it comes to business. So of course, this creates great opportunities for organizations, but probably increases their security threat from a cybersecurity point of view. So, given your extensive experience in this space, I would like to see your opinion in terms of what you think are the most prominent risks that organizations should be aware of from a cybersecurity point of view in this digital economy.
Right, fantastic.
Who wants to go first?
Well, it's a really interesting question. Maybe if I actually, some of what you draw on there drove me to set up our business in 2011. So perhaps I could explain a little bit why I'm quite interested in this topic, and maybe we sort of take it from there. That makes sense?
Absolutely. Let's keep this informal and interactive. So absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent, and I apologise for my dog, by the way. He likes to comment on things as I talk, so he might.
We always welcome special guests. No worries.
Hopefully, he won't chip in again. Okay, so look, it's a really interesting question, and I think it's great to focus on sort of digital transformation because it's really relevant. And I worked in computer security, I guess, for about 20 odd years, and I was really intrigued in sort of 2007, just when social media was really taking hold. So you had lots of people in the security consultants sort of saying, whatever you do, don't put information on the internet because it's going to create a bunch of risks. And the correct way to deal with this is just not to put any information online. And I kind of felt really frustrated by that. I was like, well, that's just not realistic, because these services are the things that are going to change the economy, they're going to change the way we work. And actually having information online is a good thing. But they also, at the same time, had a point that there's some online information that's relevant to the risk of an organization. And that sort of led me to sort of explore the concept of digital footprints in the context of computer security or information security or cybersecurity, whichever way you want to describe that field. So and I think what we arrived at very quickly was the conclusion that you've got digital footprints, which are actually a good thing to have for an organization. It helps a business connect with its customers. It helps researchers do their work. Having a digital footprint is very positive, but there's some information that's relevant to the risk of organizations. So we started to use the term digital shadow to refer to that risky information. And that's kind of led us on this crazy journey we've been on for the last 9 years. So and I can dig a bit more into that, but that's, that you sort of frame the problem, and I think that's really a good problem to focus on, because it's how do you get the best out of a digital economy at the same time as reducing those risks.
Yeah, so Wayne, I know that you specialize in the more industrial side of things. So do you see any particular threat from that point of view related to the digital economy space in a wider sense?
So, like we've seen, as this digital transformation takes place, that these industrial environments and these factories have to become more connected to the outside world, whereas traditionally these control systems would never been connected to anything. You have customers now who can order parts and cars and cereal from thousands of variations. So the factory kind of has to go through this digital transformation to be able to scale up and do batch sizes of one. So this mass customization has meant that these factories have to connect to the end customer and share a lot of data and have this digital thread through their business. And obviously they were islanded until not so long ago. So now you face this huge extra risk that's born of IoT and the Internet of Things. Everything's connected to the cloud, the customer's connected, and nothing happens in a vacuum. You've got this social media side. The customers become, again, they're more focused on quality. Where does the raw materials come from that this manufacturer is using? The supply chain is more in focus. What's the environmental footprint? So a lot of this data has to be aggregated and accumulated and sent out of these industrial factories, so they are a lot more connected. And a lot of modern security tools cannot be used on these control systems. There's a lot to take into account when you might have systems that can't be patched, and these factories might not go down for a year or two at a time. There's safety concerns with the different systems. So again, there's a lot of opportunity out there, but there's also a lot of risk that's associated to this, and especially with older systems.
Yeah, so just to follow up on what you mentioned there, both of you. So I spent 2.5 years doing research in a research center for cloud computing, and I've heard different opinions of cloud computing from different business people. The funniest one was, why would I give up my data to a bookseller? But let's say, so I still think that's quite funny. So when we think about cloud adoption, I think particularly with the companies on larger scale, I think that's kind of taken for granted at this stage, and I think they can leverage the value. But on the other side, what's your view in terms of so they are probably more conscious of the benefits and the risk. Now, when it comes to smaller and medium enterprises, what's your view in terms of their level of security, their level of understanding of the benefits and shortcomings of cloud computing before they actually get into the journey of using different cloud services? So James, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's fascinating. We really have transformed the world over the last 10 years, right? It really has changed significantly. Now, I actually came from a background where we were running air-gapped networks in sort of secure government applications, not dissimilar to how, I guess, how ICS or critical infrastructure has developed as well. And it's really interesting. You've seen that diminishing role that the perimeter plays. In, you used to have the castle walls model of security. You want to keep everything secure by building those castle walls higher and higher, and everything will be nicely protected within it. And very soon, probably only about sort of eight years ago, we started to see big problems with that model. I'm actually quite a fan of cloud security, just because I've really been interested by things like the Cloud Security Alliance, for example, who've done a lot of really good work in setting out really decent controls that often come configured by default in a secure way. So you can see big problems like, say, pick Amazon S3 buckets as an example, right? So for a while, people were opening up Amazon S3 storage buckets on the internet, and people were sort of poking around in them and collecting data and seeing data loss issues appear. And actually, if you look back to 2017, Amazon changed their whole approach to deploying those, and actually they deploy securely by default now. They've spent a lot of time making sure that that particular exposure is reduced almost entirely. So it's now not really a relevant attack vector, or a much less relevant attack vector compared to what it used to be. And I think there's a lot of lessons that have been learned quickly in these environments. I think if you add to that the speed at which it then enables business, so you see development teams, it's really nice looking at this kind of situation we're all in, where lots of us are working from home, lots of developers are working remotely. I don't think you could have developed code without some of those cloud services now. So this is a massive enablement that's occurred. There's obviously new risks that come with that. So one of the things we do is we go fishing around on things like GitHub, looking for sort of exposed keys and passwords and that kind of thing. So again, security matters, but you just think about security in a slightly different way for security, for cloud environments. And I think, the reality, as you say, is it's really a hybrid of these things that every enterprise has to deal with now. And critically, security still matters, whether you're on the cloud or whether you're got computers in a rack in a server room somewhere. You've still got to think through the problem from first principles before it gets into the design phase, before you deploy something. So as long as you're still thinking about security when you're creating things, actually it shouldn't matter too much which environment you go in. You should just do security well.
Yeah, so Wayne, would you see any difference between large and smaller organizations when it comes to cloud and their use, their perception?
No, and often we see the smaller customers could possibly be more dynamic in this environment. And I'd echo what James would say, like we always promote security by design. So if it's going to be kind of a hybrid model between what you have inside your control system, then what you might share with the edge, and then what you might put in the cloud, again, whether you're working with partners, you're doing it in-house, is really constrained and secure by design. Use vendors that have that where security matters, and have those strong alliances. Partnerships are always vital, but it really has enabled a lot more data to become visible, especially with what we see going on now, where a lot of people are not on the factory floor themselves, but still need access to the data. These companies that have adopted those cloud models have been able to adapt to the consumer's needs a lot faster as well.
Yeah, all right. So okay, now that we talked about the current situation, I would be curious to see more about what's your opinion about the future trends, what you see coming. So particularly in a world like in the cybersecurity space, which is constantly changing for obvious reasons. So do you see any particular innovation in this space which might be particularly interesting or particularly worrying in the next 3 to 5 years? Who wants to take this first? I think that's probably a bit more complex than the other one.
Yeah, I guess there's a few different directions you can go in with this one. But I mean, from my point of view, I'm very interested right now. Something I'm looking at is how organizations produce software. and how which has really changed quite significantly in the last 3 or 4 years. And I think security is kind of playing catch up with this process at the moment. So we've got really awesome tools and really amazing ways to very quickly produce high quality software that consumers and users can make use of. But in the change for example, you can just deploy whole infrastructures as code now, which you never used to be able to do. The way that we share code on things like Bitbucket, GitHub, GitLab, is quite interesting, and it's enabled a whole new ways of collaborating between developers, which enable them to produce code more quickly. And I think not enough time has really been spent looking at how security fits in around that process. And in particular, I'm quite intrigued by things like secrets management in that situation, because we quite often have sensitive things like key pairs to access servers or API credentials, and unfortunately there's a litany of issues that have come about because the hygiene isn't there, or there's been problems in people not realizing that certain services or certain capabilities are either open to the internet or just generally exposed. So I've been sort of following people have been using this moniker sec DevOps, or security development operations. So taking what people do in develop operations and adding a security layer over the top of it. And I think for me, that's sort of a fast growing capability area that I think warrants a lot of investment and time at the moment. So I'm quite excited about where that's going.
All right, thanks, James. Wayne, what's your point of view on this? What do you expect in the next 3 to 5 years to see coming up?
So from our side, we've really seen over the last year or two real kind of the automated monitoring of networks and looking for anomalies and things that are kind of out of the ordinary industrial networks that you might not have had that visibility in before. And I guess going forward is now blending that to the real threat intelligence that's come around. There's some real good automated threat intelligence tool, and blending that into those software packages that the industrial environment can deploy, and giving the security team and the automation team real insight on what to focus on. That they might have a huge multitude of vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities be the big area of concern. We see in the region of 20,000 critical vulnerabilities kind of hitting our desks every year. How does the customer manage all those vulnerabilities? How do they decide what's the most important? And I guess these software tools and machine learning and these algorithms going forward, blended with that threat intelligence and what potentially is out there impacting a certain sector, let's say critical infrastructure, the water industry. We've seen the electrical grids around the world come under real intense pressure. Is for them to then be able to see kind of who's out there, who's looking at us, what's happening, what malware's out, and and I guess that leads to this cybersecurity being more proactive versus, let's say, how reactive they've been over the last 5 years or so. That would be the real key piece for me, is deploying those tools to become more proactive.
There's a really interesting bit that you're sort of saying there, Wayne, about the spotting the sort of common behaviors that people see happening on different networks. And then I think something the security industry has been really bad at historically is sharing observations about those behaviors and comparing notes. And actually, I think something that's really improved over the last few years is some of that sharing of the information. So no doubt you're looking at things like the Ripple 20 issue that came up just recently. So this is a change to the TCP/IP stack, which is commonly, I think it's Trek, I think is the name of the stack, and it's used in a whole bunch of different technologies that are deployed in critical infrastructures. And now I think it's been quite interesting watching that, seeing how lots of different companies have been collaborating, talking about the impact of that particular vulnerability, and people are now proactively monitoring it. They're looking for evidence of people are manipulating it, and now they're sharing evidence of it being manipulated as well. So it's actually a really there's some really healthy things that are happening in our industry, and I kind of agree with you. The threat intelligence side is something we didn't do sort of 8 years ago, but is now much more prevalent.
Yeah, yeah.
So do you think that's more like a change in the overall culture of the cybersecurity community in a wider sense, or just a general approach that's more, say, open to collaboration rather than trying to keep everything within closed doors?
Well, I think there's an inherent asymmetry in cybersecurity, right? So the cost of attack is very low, the cost of defense is very high. And I think practitioners have realized that unless we collaborate, we'll never right that balance.
Okay, and speaking about collaboration, so as you might know, say cyber science, and most of the people presenting as cyber science are academics or practitioners, which are very interested in research, so in academic research. So I'd be curious to see what's your experience has been in industry academia collaboration, and then we are always looking for ideas for future research. So is there do you have any idea about, say, potential research that might help you solve current challenges that you have or future challenges that you see coming?
Yeah, I guess there's a few things I could sort of focus on there. I think probably one of the good things, I mean, you're probably familiar with this challenge, but the conversion of academic research to commercial applications has historically been a challenging area. And I know the UK government's spending a lot of time on things like knowledge transfer networks to try and facilitate that process more effectively. It's very interesting. I was on a trip to Singapore in February of this year, looking at how some of the approaches they use over there, and it was interesting to find they still have the same challenges of sort of doing that conversion between research to commercial application. I have seen some good positive things there though. So I've seen sort of organizations like Crossword Cybersecurity who specialize in taking academic research and in having like a sort of VC investment model in it, and then critically looking at how the IP clauses work in that transfer agreement. So there's a fair deal for the university, but also a fair deal for the commercial organization. And I think they've had sort of a number of successes using that type of approach. I think sort of topic wise, there's always tons of really interesting stuff going on from an academic perspective. I think where some of the things that we're sort of really interested in is how identity is manipulated online, and there's some really interesting work at the moment around how disinformation and how we can trust information on the internet. I think that's for me, that feels like the topic for the next 10 years. It's a really, really critical area. I could probably name a few more, but I won't go into too many more right now. It's just give everyone else a chance to chat.
Yeah. So Wayne, what's your point of view on this?
I'd say it's looking at it from an industry slant. I've got to say that AR for me is going to be the big kind of ticket item. Traditionally, I'd say it's quite expensive and complex to deploy, but there's a lot of benefit. Where I think the one area of concern around cybersecurity is the skills kind of shortage, and are we ever going to fill that gap? I don't suspect, not in the next few years, and I'd say AR's got a big part to play in that. We've seen the community collaborating, but I'd like kind of more that AR focus, that AR potential to help the human in the chain make better decisions. A lot of cybersecurity is decision-based mitigation steps, processes, and the more kind of the AI can route through a lot of data, we are generating more data than before, and potentially using machine learning algorithms and things like that to help the people that have got to make the decisions. I guess there's a huge benefit around that piece for us, and like I guess we know the government, a lot of nation states and governments are working on AR projects and big tech, but I don't want it to just fall into the realm of them having all that kind of capability. The small, medium enterprises, I guess, could benefit from it the most.
I think it's quite important when, because it's really nice talking to academic audiences, because they really get what artificial intelligence is all about, and they understand. You know, they're good at communicating the the real value of the mathematics and the algorithm side of it, right? But I think one of the things our industry is guilty of is just sort of playing a buzzword into a conversation where people then focus on the tool to solve the problem rather than the solution to the problem itself. So I think I'd offer a word of caution on the industry side, which is be focused on solving the problem rather than the way that you solve it. And I've it's been quite interesting watching this. We go to play shows like the RSA show on the West Coast, which is one of the large sort of security conferences, and you'll see lots of vendors sort of stood around with the words artificial intelligence on their stand, as if it's like a sort of magic dust that will solve all ills. But if you really know what you're doing, it can be incredibly useful. But if it's really, really important to focus and articulate on what problem is it solving and how does it get us to the right outcome. So I think academia needs to watch industry to call them out when it's quite plainly just basic rules-based approaches rather than actually something that's genuinely artificial intelligence.
No, I totally agree with you. So I would open up the floor to the audience there to ask questions. So for all the attendees, feel free to type in your questions using the Q&A feature that you see at the bottom of the screen. We have a few questions already. So Cyril is asking to Wayne, how has the interconnection of IT and OT increased current threat exposure landscape? And conversely, what are the benefits that this has led to?
So I guess that RT and OT convergence have kind of exposed that island, that air gap system in the past to a lot more of the outside world, to the cloud, to RT systems. A lot of attacks that have come into control networks have come from the RT organization, where they've then pivoted down into the control network, as traditionally still would be the form of attack. So there's been a lot of risk with that, and I guess that the whole way you secure those networks is completely different. Those networks rely on uptime more than anything else. That's the key piece. They've got to stay online. You wouldn't want to shut down a water network just so you can update your Windows server. Really, that's the critical piece. They've got safety system attached. So that has exposed it. And I guess what we've seen, especially over the last 5 years or so, is the RT and OT teams really coming together more to solve these challenges. I guess that's one of the real key takeaways. And of course, these systems are generating much more data. We have a lot more people that are able to visualize what's happening on the plant floor and have access to that data. I guess that's one of the real benefits of allowing these networks to have that comms to the outside world. So you don't need somebody sitting in a factory floor to be able to analyze a machine, look at when it needs to be repaired, and that data if you've got multiple manufacturing sites, you can aggregate that data and then start to work at best in class, and really has been beneficial to industrial customers to do that.
Thanks, Wayne, for a very comprehensive answer there. And then we have another question that Cyril is asking to James, but I'd be interested to get the point of view of both of you, to be honest. So I'll enlarge then the target of this question. So what would you consider as the most prevalent and pertinent cyber threat that organizations must watch out in a post-COVID-19 world? So James, do you want to take this point first?
Yeah, I get it's a tough one, that. So because it really depends on what industry you're in. I guess we've seen a bunch of attacks on, really sad actually. A lot of healthcare organizations are really suffering right now, in particular from ransomware, a really pernicious form of ransomware, which also breaches the records of the organization at the same time as it locks up all the computers in that healthcare organization. It's really pernicious. And unfortunately, healthcare organizations are under a lot of pressure right now to deliver services. And they're in the US, the insurers in the US have created a place where they're actually encouraging people to pay the ransom rather than sort of restore their networks, where perhaps they haven't ever tested their sort of backup or restore strategy. So that for that particular industry, there's a really nasty threat there, and unfortunately, it's becoming more prevalent. And just at the time when COVID is absolutely overwhelming organisations worldwide. So it's a sad one. And thankfully, our industry and volunteers are working very hard to prevent some of this at the moment. I think on the other side, though, Wayne, you've probably got a pretty good view of the sort of critical infrastructure side. For me, that's one of the biggest fish out there right now. Perhaps this would be a good point to hand over to you to talk a little bit more about that, because I really do think that's worth looking at in a lot more depth.
Yeah. I think from that side, it's definitely been the remote access now, where a lot of industries rely on third-party suppliers, OEMs, to maintain equipment and pieces of kit within those facilities. They are not able to travel or able to get there in many circumstances. So the remote access piece has been really key to that industry. And over this time, they've changed that how they securely get into the depths of the control system and make changes and monitor pieces of kit that inherently hadn't been connected before, or that somebody had to travel to physically have access to. So that whole remote maintenance, working from home, not having your engineers on site has really been the key piece that's changed this, and how customers kind of say, well, we've got to actually do this, and industry's got to open it up and have this access, but we've got to do it in a secure, maintained and monitored way.
Just to keep going on the post-COVID-19 or during COVID-19 situation there, I think someone did his homework, and so that's a direct question from James, to James, sorry. So do you have any insights into whether COVID-19 has presented any unexpected new stresses for the Royal Mail automated sorting system, which you worked on many years ago?
That's from Mr. Williams. Hello, Tim. Very specific question. Thank you. Yeah, so I did indeed, in fact, work with Tim on that years ago. So would I have any specific insights on that? I guess, I mean, like the role that delivery now plays in the current situation is transformed overnight, and the packet network that the Royal Mail run is under quite a lot of stress right now, as we all order food, everything from food to stationery via the post, some of which is sort of quite well integrated through vendors like Amazon, but some much less well integrated. So I think we have seen an increase in delays across that whole network. Actually, I'm pretty impressed with just how resilient it's been, though. I've got to say, everything I ordered online, and much to the chagrin of my partner, I seem to order quite a bit, has all arrived in a reasonable space of time.
So you were just very pleased with the work that you did every time you got a parcel on time.
I'd love to claim victory for that one, but it was definitely a teamwork exercise.
Yeah. So back, say, moving away from the COVID-19 situation there, what's your view regarding APIs, particularly given the fact that they are essential components of the cloud ecosystem? What's your view in terms of how best can we protect APIs? Do you have any insights on this? Wayne, would you like to take this one first?
Well, I guess not my area of expertise, but from what we do use, again, it comes down to, I guess, security by design, and we focus a lot within the project space, and when we build interfaces and things like that, is really the security around the holistic around the whole project, whether it be the software, the people implementing the software, and deploying that security by design really be our recommendations around building anything like that.
James?
Yeah, sure. We've been seeing things like some standardization around the way that APIs work. So in particular, sort of RESTful APIs and those that use JSON as the sort of underlying data exchange format. I think that standardization is a good thing, because it allows you to also standardize the security controls that sit around it. Building on top of things like web technologies is good. So using things like certificate-based authentication again becomes an option when you do that. I think the whole authentication piece is fascinating. So the flip side is we've now got sort of single tokens, like API tokens, that we use to access services on APIs. That's one thing, as opposed to multiple things you need to authenticate. And we've seen some fallout from that as well. So where people are now hunting down those API tokens and then using whatever resource that API token provides access to. So I wouldn't say it's perfect by any means. At least we're getting away from this world where you've got to have a bit of string connecting the consumer to the sort of the host. Whilst that is in theory a bit more secure, I think actually building the security into that exchange is the opportunity for us when we're building APIs. And good to see some sort of progress and standardization in this space.
Yeah, super. We have another question there. It's about cyber threat intelligence, and the question is, how trustworthy are cyber threat intelligence? Should we take CTI seriously, and especially when some CTI feeds may be unreliable at times? What's your thought?
So it's a really interesting question and many different aspects to it. I think I really like Sir David Omand, formerly ran GCHQ, and he talked about this concept of communicating uncertainty in a clear way. And I think a lot of intelligence is about reducing uncertainty to stop a bad thing from happening. So if you take that sort of broad definition of intelligence, I think there's a lot of good things that cyber threat intelligence organizations can do to help reduce risk. And what we've seen emerge in the industry is sort of different capabilities. So you've got everything from feeds, as I think Cyril sort of alluded to. So, these are sort of indicators that have come from some kind of forensic or some kind of system monitoring process. Those are essentially ephemeral. So, a bit like a mayfly, they're valid at the time they're observed, but they quickly diminish in value because the attacker changes infrastructure, they change behaviors very quickly. And there's a really nice diagram actually by a guy called David J. Bianco, thing called the Pyramid of Pain. That sort of, I'd show you, it's on the back of my laptop lid. But if you go and look up David J. Bianco and the Pyramid of Pain, you can see understanding behaviors are things that last. So attackers change their behavior very, very infrequently, whereas they change things like infrastructure very frequently. So actually, I've been really encouraged by things like work done by MITRE on things like the attack framework, which is looking at behaviors and looking at how you can observe common behaviors, because it's very tough for the attackers to change that. And the intelligence that's oriented around those behaviors is then super valuable, because you can then apply that to your infrastructure and look at where your controls are, look at how they might mitigate the attacks by that attacker. So I think threat intelligence can be very useful. I think if it's focused in the right area and makes it, efficient use of the resources.
Right. Wayne, would you like to add anything on the cyber threat intelligence and how trustworthy these systems are?
I guess adding to what James was saying, it's really good. I guess as a community, as you work together, is having those trusted sources, trusted relationships, certain, let's say, threat intelligence you would maybe trust more than others, testing and validating it. And some of the work done out there, especially like James said, on some of the nation states and the threat actors that are out there and how they do something, really help the let's say the industrial environments or the factories mitigate against those risks if they, say for instance, are an electrical grid. I mean, there was recently a honeypot set up in the US as an electrical grid, looking like an electrical grid, acting as it, having the same vulnerabilities, and it got exposed within 2 days. Someone had breached the network, and then using that insight, what they did, how they leveraged the network, and pushing that out into your community, and everyone else kind of using that information. I guess that's the way to build it. You really got to build on those trust relationships and where that information comes from.
Yeah, super. So we have another question there for I guess that's for both. So what are your views on the benefits and drawbacks of the QUIC protocol? Do you see this overtaking TCP-based TLS? Is that a question? I'll be honest with you, I don't know what these things mean. So I'll leave this to you if you feel like you can answer this, or do you have a view on this kind of protocol, or it's not your bread and butter, for a better word?
I've seen a little bit of discussion of it. I guess, I mean, the general point is that TLS has problems, right? And especially if you look at things like how quick and easy it is to produce certificates. So I think it is realistic to start to look at some alternatives to that. And if you look at people like Moxie Marlinspike, who's a good guy to follow, he sort of was involved in Whisper systems and some of the Signal rollouts. He's you know, I think he's spoken at length at how fundamentally broken PKI and some of the TLS is at the moment. So I think it does make sense to look at alternatives. I must admit, I've not looked at Quick in detail, so I know of it. I'd probably ask a cryptographer's opinion rather than give my own. So, but I mean, certainly something that's worth checking out and paying some attention to, I would think.
All right. Then we have another question there from Cyril. In behaviors, AUBA is toolkit, but human behavior is dynamic, situational, and occasional ad hoc. Then how could the AUBA be airtight? What behavioral indicators could be pertinent? Do you have any views on this? Who wants to go first?
So I guess this is focused on the insider threats quite often, where you're so the sort of entity and user behavior analytics concept. So the idea is that you would take a look at behaviors of human beings and look for outliers, look for strange behaviors that might suggest something's not quite right. I think there are. I think there's quite a good. I mean, ever since the sort of national security market sort of looked at change, you know, realized that insider threat was such a key threat, and it still is, I think, for any organization, one of the highest threats. EUBA was sort of heralded as the thing that would change that and enable us to spot, you know, unusual behavior. I do think there's some progress that's been made in this space, and it definitely, actually, if you look at sort of a parallel area of fraud analytics, you can see places where modeling the normal to spot the unusual works quite well. I think, though, it's like there's a guy called George Box who said all models are wrong, but some are useful. And the fact is, you might, no matter how good your EUBA model is, it's still going to fail a certain amount of the time. So I don't think you can ever find 100% perfect model. And I think it's really just like a lot of other things in security. It's a tool to help you identify unusual behaviors rather than be a sort of palliative to all ills.
Yeah, so we still have some time here. So dare I ask, what's your view on one of those buzzwords, which is blockchain? So apparently it's going to save the world, but what's your view from a security standpoint? I'd be curious to see from a security expert point of view, how do you see that going?
It's certainly an interesting idea, isn't it? So the concept of a shared ledger, I think, is a good one, and I think we are looking at new systems that enable different types of trust exchange by using a shared sort of register as a concept. So I think there's a lot of progress that's being made. I recently saw an application for sort of tracking the integrity of diamonds. So there's a big problem with blood diamonds. You know, diamonds have become sourced from unethical places, and actually creating a global register using a blockchain technology to register that. I think those kind of applications have a lot of opportunity, and I think in security, integrity is a really key part of what we have to look for, and then creating systems that can enable trust by shared view of integrity, I think is really valuable. So I think sometimes though we get a bit focused on a particular implementation of that shared register, and I think you've got to look at what implementation is right for different circumstances. One thing I spend a lot of time doing is tracing money from cyber criminals who make payments. And I work quite closely with a company called Elliptic, who are actually really very good at exactly that. And it's really interesting to see how there's lots of tools that have popped up to try and help criminals obscure where a flow of money is going to and from. And if you look at, perhaps some of the Lazarus Group behaviors recently, look at how there's billions of dollars floating around in sort of money systems that are enabled by Ethereum, Bitcoin, currency-based blockchain. They are a very useful source of intelligence if you're sort of advising folks or trying to make an attribution of a particular action. There's also still a sort of trade-off, right? You still got this kind of war going on where you've got actors who are trying to obscure where money flows are happening, and you've got intelligence folks trying to detect where they're going from and to reveal the identity of the attacker. So they play a really quite important role, I think, in cybersecurity on the currency side as well.
Wayne, what's your view on this? Particularly, I mean, you're on the industrial side of things, so particularly in the industry 4.0, blockchain seems to be say particularly interesting. So
yeah.
What do you think?
We see it as quite an enabling technology for things like, let's say, food manufacturer, and having that farm to fork concept where, let's say, the end customer could potentially use in that shared ledger, see where their raw material is coming from, which farm potentially they got a potato chip out of a bag of chips from, and enabling that kind of concept. There's some real key pieces, and I guess in long term is also enabling machines to pay each other using cryptocurrencies and having a ledger of transactions where multiple machines are paying for other services rather than machines that might be next door, where it enables then in the future customers or factories to rent machines instead of, let's say, having the capital expenditure. So I guess having that shared ledger and the security around that validated data, there are some real good upsides to it, and embracing that technology within the industrial space.
Okay, so I think we kind of covered lots of very interesting points, and so thank you again for your time, for joining us today, and for these very interesting insights. I must admit that I'm a bit disappointed James' dog didn't come back, but he probably thought that we were too boring. We can't blame him. So thank you very much for your time, and for all the attendees. Tomorrow is going to be our last day of the conference, so please join us tomorrow as well. We have another industry panel discussion, we have another keynote session, and then the conference closure there at the very end of the day. And we are interested in your feedback, so there is a survey on the attendee area, so please, it would be great if you can just spare a few minutes just to let us know how we're going, and make sure that we got everything right for the next edition of Cyber Science. So have a good evening or good afternoon, whatever you are connected from. And so I'll see you again tomorrow. And thanks, James and Wayne, for the discussion.
So pleasure.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Thanks so much.